grief. It's that universal ache we all know, isn't it? Everyone carries some kind of loss.
Mm-hmm.
But the quiet grief, you know, the sorrow held deep inside for years, maybe the kind you don't even name out loud, that's often the hardest to navigate.
Yeah, and the hardest to give space to, right? Because we live in a world that's often saying, be strong, move on.
Exactly.
And what happens when that pressure gets internalized, when grief becomes this silent weight, not the big outward wail, but something more sacred, internal, carried for maybe decades.
That's a different kind of sorrow.
It is,
Yeah.
and it needs its own space, its own acknowledgement.
Well, that quiet, sacred space is exactly what our deep dive is about today. We're exploring a project called 𝗬𝗓𝗓, a sonic requiem for grief, memory, and sacred release. It's by TATANKA.
Right. And we've got a few different sources we're drawing on here, excerpts from the project itself, a briefing document, some FAQs, and also this really quite beautiful narrative called Whispers Beneath the Neem Tree.
And our mission, really, for you listening, is to unpack what this sonic requiem actually is. How does it use sound to try and create this unique space for grief?
And what can we maybe learn from it about how we approach sorrow, memory, and, well, a different kind of release? It's about getting you up to speed quickly and thoroughly on this whole concept.
Okay, so let's start at the core. What is 𝗬𝗓𝗓 trying to be?
The sources use some powerful phrases like a memorial in sound.
Yeah, or an ambient cathedral. That language straight away tells you it's not just background music, right?
No.
It's intended as this dedicated, almost consecrated environment. And the name itself, 𝗬𝗓𝗓, it comes from the Latin for wailings, but they seem to be reinterpreting that.
How so?
It sounds like they're evoking that sacred internal kind of grief, the sort held silently, maybe by someone who felt they never really got permission to mourn outwardly. So the sorrow just took root deep inside.
It's acknowledging those roots, not just the surface wound. I was really struck by that Nick Cave quote they included.
Oh, yeah. Grief and love are forever intertwined. Grief is the terrible reminder of the depths of our love, and like love, grief is non-negotiable. That feels fundamental here.
It absolutely does. It anchors the whole thing in that inseparable link between loving deeply and the loss that can follow.
Yeah.
And crucially, the materials are very clear about what this album is not trying to do.
Okay.
It doesn't promise some kind of quick healing or push for catharsis in that, conventional way. That idea of a big emotional purge that suddenly makes everything okay.
So it's not like a listen to this and you'll be over it kind of deal.
No, not at all. Far from it. Instead, its purpose, as they describe it, is more about meeting you exactly where you are, holding you there.
Holding you.
By wrapping you in sound, providing a sort of sanctuary, especially for those who felt they were never allowed to fully mourn or who carry a sorrow too old to name.
Wow.
It's designed for anyone who feels they need to lay something to rest, not forget it, but bless it, release it, and honor it. It's offering companionship to the sorrow, not demanding it vanishes.
Bless it, release it, and honor it. That really reframes the whole idea of moving on, doesn't it?
It does.
Okay, so if the emotional heart is creating this space, this accompaniment, how does this sound design actually build that? What are the specific elements they're using?
Right. This is where the technical choices get really interesting because they seem to directly serve that emotional goal. The whole sonic foundation is built around two very specific frequency applications.
Frequencies,
Right.
like the actual building blocks of the sound itself.
Exactly. So first, they incorporate 5 hertz binaural beats.
Okay, binaural beats. That's when you play slightly different frequencies in each ear.
Precisely. And the brain perceives this third beat frequency, the difference. In this case, 5 hertz. Now, 5 hertz falls right into the theta brainwave range, which is usually around 4 to 7 hertz.
And theta is associated with?
Deep meditation, relaxation, accessing the subconscious. The sources say its purpose here is explicitly emotional access, grief processing, and creating a state that's conducive to deep emotional work and neurochemical rebalancing.
So it's like gently guiding your brain towards a state where processing might feel safer, more possible, without being jarring.
Exactly, creating a receptive inner environment. Then the second key element is the 432 hertz tuning. This is used as the main carrier frequency for the music.
432 hertz. I've heard about that tuning. There are different ideas about it.
There are, yeah. But it's often associated with things like natural harmony, spiritual attunement, emotional grounding. In 𝗬𝗓𝗓, they say it's used to anchor the music to the heart's natural resonance.
Okay, interesting. So the 5 hertz helps maybe open up that internal space for feeling, and the 432 hertz provides a sense of grounding. connecting it to the body, perhaps, or the heart.
That seems to be the intention laid out in the materials, yeah.
Right.
And then, building on that frequency base, they layer in other sonic textures.
Like what?
Things like soft ambient pads, these long, slow sounds, almost like breathing, and very sparse instrumentation.
Sparse how?
We're talking really minimal use of minor piano chords, maybe some gentle chimes, harmonic drones, sounds the sources describe beautifully as almost whispered.
Almost whispered. That really captures that sense of quiet internal sorrow you mentioned earlier. It's not shouting.
Not at all. And they also bring in natural field recordings, specifically sounds from the Indian wilderness rain, animals, birdsong.
Oh, okay. Is that just for atmosphere?
Apparently not just atmosphere, they're meant to be symbolic, representing the natural world continuing on.
Oh, I see.
Providing that sense of continuity, a reminder that life persists even when you're dealing with personal loss, and that you're held within this larger, ongoing rhythm.
That's quite a profound way to use nature sounds. Not just background noise, but like accompaniment from the living world.
Mm-hmm. So the goal of combining these intentional frequencies, the gentle textures, sparse instruments, and nature sounds, is to build this safe inner environment, one that supports emotional catharsis, subconscious healing, and importantly, grief release without re-traumatization.
Without re-traumatization, that's key.
Absolutely. And it's all designed, they say, to connect with the heart center.
The heart sound.
Yeah. The sources even mention a specific WAV file. They've created a 5 Hz, 432 Hz binaural healing tone. It's short, loopable, precisely engineered to create that 5 Hz difference, but anchored to the 432 Hz frequency.
And what's that for?
Well, they suggest using it in longer ambient pieces, or even in therapeutic settings, personal healing work.
It sounds like every single aspect of the sound is just incredibly deliberate, crafted for a very specific emotional effect.
It really seems that way.
The sources also mention that the album's tracks aren't just songs, but are intended as movements in a ritual. How does structuring it like that guide the listener?
Well, thinking of them as movements suggests more of a journey, right? A process, rather than just hitting play on a collection of tracks.
Like steps in a ceremony?
Kind of, yeah. And the track titles themselves seem to act as symbolic signposts within this ritual. For instance, Calling the Silence. You could see that as intentionally entering that space of mourning.
Yeah.
Or Mother of No More Tomorrows. Maybe that's about acknowledging and honoring a really deep wound. In the hollow hours, sounds like it's just about sitting with the sorrow, not fighting it.
Just being present with it.
Exactly. Then something like The Light She Left shifts the focus towards memory, maybe framing it as an enduring presence, not just an absence.
In the end.
A track called Return to the Pulse, which could signify a kind of emerging, but maybe not into happiness necessarily, but into a state of being present again, feeling held, reconnected somehow.
Not necessarily into happiness, but into a state of being present, held, and reconnected. That really echoes that core idea of an accompaniment over just trying to fix it.
It really does. Yeah.
Now, to really get a sense of how this might actually feel for someone, the sources include this specific narrative, a kind of case study maybe. It's called Whispers Beneath the Neem Tree. Tells the story of a woman named Rika.
Ah, yes, this story is. Well, it's a really powerful illustration of how lamenta might work for an individual. Raka, her name, apparently means line traced in sand, grew up near Vadnagar, and she had this incredibly deep bond with her younger sister, Avya.
And what happened to Avya?
The narrative says she was tragically swept away in a monsoon. This was 3 years before the story takes place. Just a sudden, devastating loss.
Oh, awful. And how did Rika and her family, her community, deal with that grief?
Well, the story paints this picture where after the initial shock and the, traditional rituals, this deep silence just fell over everyone.
Silence.
Yeah. They avoided saying Avya's name. They told Rika to keep busy. It sounds like ongoing grief was treated almost as something inappropriate, maybe shameful to show.
So she was just left holding it all inside.
Exactly. The narrative says her grief grew roots deep within her. She stopped singing, prayers felt hollow, time didn't heal, it just sort of stretched the ache.
That sounds incredibly isolating.
It does. She'd go and sit under this large neem tree, apparently a place where she felt the wind was like her sister's breath. And she started hearing this low hum there, which felt like the earth itself remembering.
Wow. And how did Lamenta come into her life?
Through what's described as a strange recommendation from a cousin in Ahmedabad. This cousin had heard about TATANKA and described their project as something that, well, that doesn't try to fix you. They let you grieve.
After years of being told to keep busy, That must have sounded, I don't know, revolutionary, freeing.
You'd imagine so. She took the recommendation, went back to the neem tree, and listened.
And what was that experience like for her?
She said the music began like breath, more like a hush. It felt, she said, like someone wiping tears from the edges of time. As she listened to the layers, the frequencies, she felt her body remembered something ancient and broken.
Remembered.
Yeah. The music seemed to make space for her sorrow. It allowed her sister's presence, her voice, to return not in words, but in feeling. And the weight inside her started to shift, not lessen, just shift.
Not lessen, just shift. That's a crucial distinction, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about the burden disappearing, but maybe being held differently, making room for it.
Precisely. And she felt compelled to write to TATANKA. Didn't really expect a reply, apparently.
But she got one.
She did, from someone named Ayaka. And the response was incredibly resonant. It said, "This album is not the end. It is the vessel. You are the ritual."
You are the ritual. Wow, what a powerful thing to say. It affirms her own internal experience, doesn't it?
Completely. And the narrative says that connection, that message, allowed Rika to cry. But not the sharp grief, but the soft grief, the kind that says, yes, they mattered.
Ah, so not the raw pain of the fresh wound, but that softer acknowledgement of the love that was still there.
Exactly, the enduring love.
And the story ends with her creating something for her community, right?
Yes, inspired by her experience, by Ayaka's words, she organized a listening circle under that same neem tree.
Listening circle.
Yeah. She hummed wind chimes made from Avia's old bangles in the branches, invited others from her community who she knew carried their own silent sorrows, and they just listened to Lamenta together.
Did they talk?
No. The narrative specifically says no one had to speak. The sound did it for them. It describes birds returning to the tree, the wind seeming to pause while they listened.
So it became this shared silent ceremony, facilitated by the sound itself, creating that communal space where words weren't even needed.
Mm-hmm. And the story finishes by describing Rika's shift. She smiled quietly, a smile that was not joy, it was reverence.
Reverence.
Reverence for her sister, for the ache itself, seeing it as proof of her love, and for the music that had somehow remembered and honored what others had tried to forget.
That story really brings all these abstract concepts about Lamenta, the sound design, the intention into such vivid human focus.
It really does.
So, okay, let's try and pull this all together. Looking at the album's concept, the sound design specifics, and Rika's incredibly powerful story, what are the main insights we can take away from this deep dive?
Well, I think the most significant insight really is that fundamental reframing of grief. It's not presented as a problem that needs solving or curing. It's more like a presence to accompany.
Accompany, not conquer.
Exactly. And the project, especially through Ross's experience, really underscores how vital it is to receive permission to grieve, particularly for that quiet, long-held sorrow that society often just ignores or suppresses.
That idea of permission feels huge, especially in cultures where maybe showing emotion is discouraged.
Absolutely. And it challenges that whole linear idea of healing, doesn't it? It suggests that healing isn't always forward, it can be inward. True healing, or maybe release, might not mean forgetting or just progressing. It might actually be about finding a way to be with the sorrow.
Integrating it, perhaps, rather than trying to overcome it.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. The story and the project both highlight that healing can mean being witnessed, whether that's by other people, by yourself, or even perhaps by sound itself.
Finding reverence.
Finding reverence, exactly, for the love, for the loss, rather than just trying to fix the feeling. It really emphasizes the power of sound as a kind of ceremony, a sanctuary, and the potential value of creating these intentional listening spaces, even communal ones like Rika's circle.
It's about consciously creating that container, isn't it? For the sorrow to just exist, be held.
Ultimately, I think it reinforces this really powerful, maybe even radical idea, our fundamental right to grieve. And to grieve in a way that feels authentic, maybe even beautiful, finding that reverence within the ache itself.
This deep dive into Lamenta has definitely offered a really powerful, maybe different perspective on grief and what sound can potentially do. We've explored TATANKA's unique sonic requiem, how its very specific sound design tries to intentionally craft this sacred space for internal, often quiet, grief, offering that crucial permission just to be with sorrow.
And Rika's story under the neem tree just illustrates that so beautifully.
It really does. And the sources seem to suggest that maybe true release from grief doesn't come from pushing it away or forcing ourselves to move on really quickly.
But maybe, paradoxically, it comes from allowing it to be fully witnessed, deeply held, truly honored.
So a final thought for you to take away. What does that perspective mean for how you think about grief? Your own, perhaps? Or the grief of people around you?
And what does it suggest about the power of creating intentional spaces, whether through sound like lamenta or other means for that really profound internal process, something to sit with, perhaps?
Yeah. You might find yourself exploring ideas around sound therapy, or maybe thinking about how different cultures influence the way we grieve.
Or even just reflecting on what it really means to deeply witness someone else's sorrow without that immediate impulse to try and fix it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.